Want to make your own podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easy, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. Here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I have an outlet for the creativity and ideas I want to share with the world. I recommend you give it a try. We all have a voice, so share it with the world. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app, or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Welcome to the Days of Noah podcast, where we talk all things biblical, supernatural, and strange. Today we're going to continue our discussion on ancient elongated skulls, and then move into some of the technology that was used to create megaliths, and how that relates to the understanding of resonant frequencies, the power of words, and how this technology would have been used to cut and move stones, as well as how frequencies affect life, our cells, and the world around us.
As I was looking into this week, I did a Google search, just a simple elongated skulls search. And I swear the first 15 entries were debunking. There was more debunking entries than I could find of actual open-minded searches or experimental, not necessarily experimental, but just searches.
Right. Yeah, so they were largely in favor of just saying that cradle headboarded over and over.
Yeah, that was the thing that just kept coming back over and over.
And was it like forum groups or articles or news?
They appeared to be more so articles. I only read one and then looked at the titles of the other ones because I didn't want to spend all my time, researching why why people think that it's not true.
It's largely just being dismissed, right, out of hand.
Oh, I totally agree.
And they aren't looking at, we went over the kind of the bullet points last week, but just for a brief recap, you have the sagittal suture missing, you have larger cranial mass, you have up to 50% larger eye sockets. The jawbone is different. The foramen magnum, where the spinal column comes in, is about an inch off. Then there's these little bones in the back that Derek Olson talked about called the Inca bones that our skulls don't have. And the volume inside of the skull is, a lot of people say 20 to 25%, but I recall L.A. Marzulli saying up to 40% when he did a test. So he had a regular human skull, he filled it with rice, and then dumped that out into a container to measure it. Did the same thing with the elongated, and there was 40% more volume. Yeah, you can't get those types of features. Those are things that people are born with, and I believe on episode 132 with Blurry Creatures with Derek Olson, he mentions it. I think it was in Iran where they found these skulls, but some of them were infants, so you wouldn't have had the time to do the head boarding or binding. They had them right out of the womb, apparently. But yeah, I don't know. What did you think? Did it make you skeptical when you found all that stuff, or you were kind of like, huh?
I guess I would have been a lot more skeptical back in 2019.
Yeah.
But given the date, I think that there's more of an open mind on my end for things that are just out there and not necessarily mainstream.
Right. Yeah, given the climate that we're in and the suppression of information and just the way the mainstream tries to control narratives, right? Yeah, makes you skeptical of the main things that are said.
One thing to add in there on the control of narratives, is it possible that governments are trying to keep that from people so people don't freak out and, cause panic and things like that? And more so than not, people would probably lean more towards aliens than they would towards giants, Nephilim.
Right. Something that they can put in a framework that they've been sold for a long time with movies, Hollywood, and now, the Ancient Aliens show, all of that.
And on top of it, outside the Bible, because that's not looked at as a good source. Having
I'm going to say ungodly, non-godly explanation for origins of things. We can explain it away in different naturalistic ways. Yeah, I agree with you that I think there's so much to what are they trying to push, what are they trying to hide, and then also if you have all of these physical features, you can't account for it with the headboarding. You really can't. It's just there's too many things. But some questions that I thought of for the first people that did headboarding, who would have been the first and why? Like, just imagine a time in history where it was never done, the headboarding, and then somebody thought of it or somebody taught somebody to do it, and why? Like, imagine you're the head of the household or something in whatever BC. Hey, honey, I think I'm going to do this next month when little Joe pops out. What? like how did he bring it up? So, I mean, it's talked about a lot about emulating something else. They saw something else. They're the elite class, the rulers, the gods, or naturally, we're saying naturally elongated skulls. People that had these features, wouldn't they be scared of their children's health? That they're going to do this. Like, you're going to do what to my child? And just think of the mother instinct, right? Why would other family members be okay with that? Who taught them? Did they have to do trial and error? One of the Blurry Creatures episodes, they were talking about, like, pharmakia, sorcery and drugs and, wild mushrooms and stuff. And, like, did people really just go around and start popping these things in their mouth? Like, most of those mushrooms would kill you, It makes you think, like, someone probably had to teach them this knowledge. They wouldn't just go, oh, that looks good to eat.
One thing that we were discussing when it comes, just now, when you were talking about who came up with the idea, there's always, I think, people coming up with strange ideas. And I think one thing that the show was leading to was the emulation of something that they saw. I think that you had talked about that already. Mm-hmm. And also a thought came to me about the sagittal sutures. Is it possible, and I know the foramen magnum portion kind of throws this theory off, but is it possible that the cradle boarding pushed the sutures together, causing them to disappear? Is that possible? However, unlikely due to the theory of the foramen magnum and the balance of their head versus their body.
Yeah, so just the idea that it would have changed how these things are formed. So I think at first glance it's plausible, but then I wonder if you took a baby right out of the womb, do they already have that? So maybe that's worth looking into.
And they do.
They do. Okay.
They do, because the sutures allow their heads to form like a cone so they can be birthed.
Okay. Yeah, right. Because of the softness of the baby's skull. That makes sense. Right, but again, like you brought up, it doesn't account for a lot of the other things. You aren't going to add cranial mass by just shaping something. You aren't going to increase the volume inside the brain cavity.
Or add the Inca bones either.
The Inca bones, the eye sockets being much larger. Let's talk about the eye sockets real quick too, because, and again, I don't want to paint too broad of a brush and say these were of the giants, although there seems to be a relation there genetically, because a lot of these elongated skulls were on, 5 foot, 6 foot people. So nothing out of the ordinary in their stature. But some of the discussion on giants and living underground and being in caves, they have very pale skin a lot of times. And it's thought that they had basically night vision. And I wonder too if that's is a feature of the orbital increase is like 50% bigger. Yeah, maybe there was something to do with their sight that was enhanced.
It could even be something as simple as the way that animals see in the dark, with the reflective in the rear. Pardon me, the rear of the eye has a reflective.
Yeah.
How should I say that? Maybe we'll just bail on that right now.
That's good.
Well, one of the things dealing with I forget, you cited them off quite well on all those different features. If they were to manipulate the suture, I think it was, is that the part of the skull that's open, allows the spinal column and the nervous system to come up to the brain?
That part is the foramen magnum, I believe.
But
foramen.
It was one of them that it was saying it was basically moved, like it was in a totally different spot.
Yes. Yeah, and about an inch off.
And in order to manipulate that, you would probably kill somebody. Out of all the features, that's the one that stands out to me, because, you're not going to kill somebody in the process. And how long does it take to headboard somebody? It was a good point you made about the infants. If they're already showing that characteristic, how long does it actually take? And I don't know if any of those articles that Don was looking at, I know he said he didn't really dig into them, but I don't know. How many years would it take to manipulate a soft infant skull to get it to be pointed? I don't know.
Well, when a child first comes out, they'll have a cone head to a point, but then that goes away very, very quickly. And maybe they grab them right out of the birth canal and put them in whatever device they were using.
So what is generally the age at which an infant's skull begins to harden, right? Because you have to be careful with a newborn for how many months or years? First year, something?
I want to say 6 months or so, but that's getting into some medical stuff that I'm not too aware of.
I mean, there's a shelf life to that, right? Where the skull is hardening, right? So I'd imagine they would have to do this headboarding, from birth or close to birth, and then for a period of months. But then at some point, you can't shape it anymore, probably, right? Because things are setting up in place like cement,
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah. I thought we could move into some of the other things that were talked about on megaliths, technology, acoustics, resonances, frequencies, stuff like that. So Derek mentioned on the show, acoustic properties in underground chambers, possibly due to rituals to enhance their psyche. And did elongated skulls possess abilities similar to that due to their anatomy? Maybe there was something sounds or frequencies or resonances that they were able to create just by their anatomy. And he mentions one of the giant tribes in the Bible, Zamzummim, described as talking gibberish, and I think noisemakers or something like that was another term used in some historical writings. And then, of course, the Josephus quote about the giants, terrible to the hearing. So there's seems to be some sort of acoustic qualities or some abilities that these beings had.
When you're talking about gibberish, I guess we would have to go a little bit further for me when it comes to the different languages. There's tribes in Papua New Guinea that speak in very strange sounds. There was a missionary to Papua New Guinea that we support, and he is a language expert, and he actually spoke a little bit in the language, and I'll give it my best shot here real quick, but it was like he was using sounds like, just
clicks and
very,
stuff.
very strange. And
like that movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. Do you remember that one? Where the Coke bottle falls out of the sky.
That's the only part I remember of that.
Yeah, but I think it was like that. It was like little clicks. Yeah.
But again, when we're talking about noisemakers, I think that and to torpedo what I just said, it's highly possible that people back then knew there was different languages, and to assign noisemaker was probably something pretty.
Yeah. I just wonder if it connects to something like what Josephus said, where it was terrible to the hearing, like they just had, and maybe just. If you've got a 10 or 12 foot creature, they could probably
bellow out something that's pretty psycho sounding.
Make an opera singer jealous with how they can project. Oh, yeah,
so the caves,
right?
The
caves,
the psyche.
Yeah, because of how those acoustic chambers carved out of ground. I think it's called the Oracle because of the way it just continues to echo through there. So, I mean, that in and of itself just shows a level of technology that they could do that. I was gonna reference one of the latest Blurry Creatures episodes had a firsthand testimony of seeing a giant when this guy he's 42 now. He was 15 with his friend. And when they encountered this thing up in a tree, he said it was about 14 feet estimated. He said that he felt it was hard to breathe. And when this thing laughed, I forget how he described it, but there was almost like a supernatural power to its voice.
One thing I wanted to add, when you were talking about rituals and sound and the caves and things like that, the old monasteries, the cathedrals would be built in ways that had, I don't know about the monasteries, I'll just go with the cathedrals, but they were built in ways that would enhance the chanting of the monks and things like that. And maybe that was something that had been learned from the people who we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Speaking of monks, did you happen to check out that one video on the YouTube link I sent you talking about moving stones? Did you see that one?
No.
All right. That's an emphatic no. All right.
I saw the one about the words and the apples.
Okay. Yep, that was one I made long time ago. Yeah, so check that out when you get a chance. But it's so Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson on Joe Rogan mentioned this too, talking about there are ancient writings. I think they mentioned Egypt, talking about how they were able to move things and cut things with sound. And So that kind of dovetails with this video that I sent you.
That I didn't watch.
Yep,
so
that's okay.
My apologies
that's
on that.
okay. So I think it was in 1939, and forgive me, I don't recall the name of the person, but he went overseas and observed, a bunch of monks standing in like an arc with instruments. Some of them had like horns, some were banging drums, and like 60 meters in front of them, they had like this big slab of rock. It was like a meter by a meter and a half, they said. So this guy from the West, he was observing this, and they're blowing the horns, playing the drums for several minutes, nothing's happening. And they had the slab was set in like they had carved out like a bowl for this to sit on. And after a few minutes, the stone begins to rise, and then like in a parabolic arc, it rises up into the air, and there's like a cliff face. They said was about 250 meters high, with an opening, like a cave opening, cut out. And stone after stone, they said 5 to 6 per hour, they were lifting up into the air with sound and setting on this ledge. And that is just fascinating. So Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock talk about that same kind of technology.
Well, it's also, I believe, was mentioned in this podcast as well with Jericho.
Oh, exactly. Yes. Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to get into too, is to kind of talk about how does the Bible, either in actual events or just in the language it uses, talk about the power of words, power of frequencies. Yeah, so Jericho, they walked around the walls for 7 days. On the seventh day, did they do it 7 times on the seventh day?
Yes, and then they were given the instructions to, and I believe that the podcast said, blow the horns, kind of in that fashion, and everybody shout. And, I mean, we don't know what those horns were. They were probably ram horns, but who knows?
Shofar, something like that.
And the walls came tumbling down.
Yeah, so you have, it's like one of the first scientific things you kind of learn as a kid is like, if a opera singer sings a certain note, he or she can crack a wine glass, right? So that has to do with the inherent resonant frequency of that object. I remember my buddy, when we were building a recording studio years ago, he'd bring up, we'd be, hit a note or something on a guitar, played through an amplifier, and we'd hear like the wall or the desk or something vibrate. Oh, yep, we're hitting the resonant frequency of that piece of drywall or that piece of wood or whatever.
Well, and people who can't hear anything still can enjoy music based on the vibrations and the vibrations and the frequencies that it's caused by.
Yeah, was it Bach that went deaf, and he was still composing by like laying his ear down on the piano? Was that or Beethoven? Beethoven was.
Beethoven.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to what sounds and frequencies. I mean, just the overly quoted Tesla quote is, the secrets of the universe are in energy, sounds, and vibration, or frequencies and vibrations, rather. One part of that video, too, they were talking about actually destroying cancer cells with frequencies. That it took them months to figure out the exact frequencies, but it was a low frequency and a high frequency simultaneous on the 11th harmonic. And once they found those 2 tones, and then what they would do is they pulsed it, because I guess if it was a constant tone, you could cause damage to, the cells of the body, because they would, like a microwave, it would heat up. So it was just a pulse. It was on, off, and it was the resonant frequency of different cancer cells.
Well, and you have ultrasounds that are used to break up the kidney stones.
There you go.
And ultrasound in and of itself can bring a picture.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, that's a good segue, Don, to cymatics, which if you've ever seen a video of like a metal plate connected to a speaker or put near a speaker, and then they'll dump some sand on it, and every tone, I mean, just kind of go up, 400 hertz, 401, 402, just, I mean, on and on. They make a symmetrical geometric pattern. I think that's just fascinating. God made, frequencies to have a visual geometric representation.
That reminds me of the game back in the day. This was more of a vibrations thing, but the football game with all the players that are moving around. I know that.
I had that.
I know how that has not much to do with what we're talking about.
Oh my gosh, that game was so fun.
I had to add it.
Kids today have no idea. That thing, yeah, you shoved a 9-volt in there or whatever, and you're like hoping your little vibrating character makes it to the end zone.
Well, yeah, you have your energy in the 9-volt, and that translates to vibration, which causes the most interesting game ever created, probably.
Oh man, some of those games are just fantastic. Yeah, so there's frequencies that can do damage, frequencies that can even heal. I'm just starting to get into looking into that, but certain frequencies that have a beneficial effect on the body, on pain relief, taking care of disease, things like that. One of the tests they did with frequencies was on MRSA, which is, antibiotic resistant pretty much, and then they were able to use a frequency that made antibiotics work, so it weakened it enough that it worked. Let's look up a few Bible verses about words and see what we can find. I know just kind of off the top of my head, like, Jesus even being called the Word made flesh, and then right at the beginning of Genesis, and God said, "Let there be light." And I think it's Michael Tellinger, when he was on Blurry Creatures, he was talking about sound actually being able to move faster than light, and light can't exist without frequencies. Like I think he said the light is a symptom or a byproduct or a result of the frequency. I think there's mysteries in a lot of these Bible verses. We just kind of take at face value and go, "Oh yeah, he spoke it and made it. Well, he's God, so obviously." But I think there's mysteries of physics and just the order of creation that he made.
Well, and to add to that, when you're talking about words are frequencies. They're different patterns, and they're very powerful because you can take those frequencies, make them into whatever word in whatever language, and you can actually hurt a person emotionally with that. So, I mean, how far do these frequencies reach?
Yeah, exactly. So that was, and that's a good point, and another good segue into, again, you want to talk about, do a Google search and everything will debunk it. But Dr. Masaru Emoto, I believe Japanese scientist, who discovered that there are effects on water based on different frequencies, different types of music, and even different types of words. Positive words like love and thank you versus, I hate you and you're garbage, things like that. And he, through microscopic photography, photographed how the water would crystallize. I think under freezing the water to make it crystallize like into a snowflake. And when it was certain types of music, beautiful music, classical, let's say, or positive words, there would be these amazing symmetrical, geometric, snowflake-like crystals. And then the negative words had just a very chaotic, garbled crystal formation. And then another thing he did further than that was to experiment with food, like dumping rice into containers and then adding some water to it, and then like writing positive words on one container, negative on another, ignoring the third container, and then after several weeks looking at the results. And they're pretty astounding. I mean, I sent you the videos of the ones I did myself. I didn't have a third control container. I just did one positive, one negative. I did it with an apple, cut it in half. I did it with fresh cooked brown rice, hot out of the pan, put in the same type of containers. And I taped positive words like love and kindness, things like that. I love you. Negative words on the other. And it was night and day. The rice that had the positive words still looked like rice. It smelled like rice 2 weeks later, left out in ambient temperature. And the negative word one was a yellow pus-like color and just reeked. The apple, the one half with the positive words, and sometimes I would say the words to the container or just think them, as often as I remember to do it daily. And then the apple, the one half had about 10% of it was mushy on one edge, so I cut it down the middle, and the other side of it looked like it was fresh. And then the cut flesh, the open flesh, was a little brown, but it didn't have any mold or anything. The other side of the apple was 90% mush. Like the whole thing was squishy. And there was a lot of fuzz, mold growing on that cut side. So just anecdotal, of course, but I've seen other videos, people recreating this. And one thing I want to share for maybe a future episode, because I want to go back to it, is if you've ever heard of the late Derek Prince. He was a fantastic preacher, author, evangelist, just a wealth of good teaching and knowledge. And I think it was on his talk on blessings and curses. And he was talking about how he literally had seen, like, dealt with, I think, in counseling or other settings, people who grew up in a household where they were told things like, I hate your guts, things like that. It was just a very verbally abusive kind of situation. And they literally manifested physical, somatic symptoms, like in their stomach.
Well, yeah, I can completely understand that. Growing up, when there's, all of us go through these periods of time where, your parents might have some not so nice things to say to you, obviously, because you did something wrong in a normal family, at least, or how should I say, a family that's a little bit more kind to each other. And you're going to get a stomach ache, especially from what you did, but then also after getting caught and spoken to in a way that you're not used to from your parents, can cause major issues. And I just remember my stomach would hurt really bad.
Or even people say, literally someone dying of a broken heart. Or in Revelation, men's hearts will fail them for fear. So there's incredible power in emotions and words and thoughts that manifest physically. And I think that's just, it's a testament, some of this stuff sounds very new agey, but it's ultimately God's creation. Like how he made us to work, how he made the physical world to work. Yeah, I think it's just fascinating, and it ties right in because we're talking about how are these ancient megaliths made. It ties right into a technology that was kind of lost that's now being rediscovered. You can go on YouTube and see videos of people levitating little marble-sized things with sound. And I think they do it not in the same way we're talking about with the ancients. They're doing it with like standing waves where it's like opposing frequencies kind of set against each other. So it's a little different that way, but some of these structures that they built, like I'm watching a YouTube presentation, a seminar, where he's showing pictures of granite stone, and it looks like it's cut on a lathe. It's so smooth, and it's like a curvature. And this is supposed to be, in the Bronze Age. Like, how are you going to cut granite with that precision? So yeah, it makes me think like, okay, you can get a bunch of monks in an ark and you can lift a slab, but what kind of precision tool would you need to make a laser-like cut?
I know that they cut granite with water nowadays.
Yep.
I saw a show on that a while back, but high pressure water, and I wonder if frequencies, and I don't think frequencies work under pressure, but they do in a way, I guess, with the waves.
I guess they would, because if you look at just even decibels, sound pressure level, SPL, so I guess there would be a measurement of pressure, wouldn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing about frequencies is that when you're talking about like certain ways of communication, we communicate all day long with frequencies. Mm-hmm. All day long.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, if you said to somebody a couple hundred years ago before, I think Marconi is the one that gets credit for radio, but I think Tesla actually discovered it before him. But anyway.
Well, wasn't there a part of a song, just Jefferson Starship said Marconi, so that's got to be what it was.
Okay, well then that confirms it then. Yes. But yeah, if you said to somebody in, I don't know, the 1700s, let's say, that, it's possible to say something or transmit language hundreds of miles, they'd go, well, wait a minute, if I yell at the top of my lungs, it's only going to go, a mile or something. Like, they would have no concept of like radio frequencies being able to be sent and picked up, deciphered,
and translated back. And I think the thing that really amazes me is that the sound of someone's voice is accurate through these frequency changes. So
right.
It's not just like some sort of a digital recreation.
Right, yeah. Just even what we're doing now, like capturing our voices on microphones, like just translating that into something digital.
Well, like Pete has the midnight DJ voice, and I have the high nasally tone.
Oh, you got to get up on the mic a little bit closer. You get
there. That's going to help a little bit.
Now Don sounds like he's on coast to coast now. Yep, yeah, and I think too, going back to like Dr. Emoto's experiments with rice and water. I mean, think of how much water makes up everything, right? How much of our bodies, how much of the earth. And then even, well, I was going to say oxygen as a part of H2O, but that's another thing as far as how oxygen affects things. But yeah, just water being able to be affected by frequencies, by emotions, by sounds. And God made all of this technology into his creation. That's what I think is amazing. And as we're talking about ancient technologies, things that sound new age, things that sound like occult or witchcraft, which a lot of them are, where's that dividing line between where it's it's unethical or an abomination to God. And I think if we were to explore that question, it's kind of about how something is supplanting or counterfeiting where our worship goes, where our adoration goes, where our affection and attention goes. And we'll hopefully talk about this in a future episode about wandering stars and astrology and how, the ancients were able to interpret things from the heavens. But God made these technologies to work. And I think that's one of the reasons why humans have a tendency to get pulled away from God, because they are seeing things that actually have legitimate uses. Someone gets into witchcraft and their spell works, either demonically or some other force of nature that they're tapping into. God says, don't mess with that stuff. It's a counterfeit. You don't know what you're messing with, but it's not to say that these things aren't real. And I think that's the appeal as we look at, like, how many times we see Israel going after other gods. Like, we just slap our forehead like a V8 moment, right? Oh, I could have been worshiping Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think we do the exact same thing in different ways. And
different ways, yeah. And that's a question, just to bring up the idea of idolatry. Tim Alberino makes the distinction very succinctly. He says, idolatry is a very specific thing. It's not, I'm too into football, or I spend too much time playing video games. Like, I think we kind of spiritualize it, and I think there's something to that. Like, where our affections go. But I also think that there is, a literal, where is your devotion to? And Mike Heiser gives a good example from Scripture about that. I don't have the reference off the top of my head, but it's where in the Old Testament there was a pagan priest or something like that who saw the power of God, and he wanted to take soil home with him because he knew that part of his job was to go into these temples and do these rituals. But once he had seen the one true God, he wanted to literally take holy ground with him and bring it back.
Yeah, that's one story I've never heard, and I wonder if it's not just contained in a small set of verses that just doesn't jump out at as much.
Naaman, let's see here, 2 Kings 5. Why did Naaman want some of Israel's soil? So let's look this up. So, Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. So this is in 2 Kings 5. He was great in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So I'm going to skip ahead here. Okay, it was Elisha, prophet Elisha.
Is he the person that Elisha told to go into the river to clean off like 7 times, or was that a king? I think he was talking about.
Yes, it is. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan. Yeah, and he's like, I thought you would have done... Oh, here, I'll just read it. I thought you would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord and wave his hand over the spot and cure me. So he's upset at the method of being cured. But he goes and does it anyway. He gets cured. Yeah, really, I should just refer to Mike Heiser's. It's got a short video on this. An altar of earth you shall make unto me. Let's see here. Naaman requested some of Israel's soil to follow verse 24 of the 20th chapter of Exodus, where it says, you shall not make me gods of silver or of gold, an altar of earth you shall make. And Mike Heiser says I guess there's a verse, I'm not finding it right now, but where he asks Elisha, will God know that I am devoted to him, even though I have to go do these, as part of my job, I have to go do these rituals. And where I was, in a roundabout way, I'm trying to get to this idea of allegiance. So the idea of idolatry being allegiance, where we all have our sin issues, we all have our things we do too much of and not enough, time with God or loving others. But there's something very specific about idolatry being a conscious and continual allegiance to something other than God. And I think that's where the allure of other gods in the Old Testament is very evident when you think of the Genesis 6 event and the things that the Watchers were teaching mankind, and all of these different types of corruption that happened. It wasn't that, oh, I like the look of your little gold statue there. I think I'm going to worship that instead of the God that literally just saved me out of the Red Sea, from the Egyptians. Like, it doesn't add up unless you realize that these gods had power, that they were small g gods, and that there was something alluring about it. It wasn't just made up. So when God says there is none like me, he's not saying there's no other gods. He's saying there's no one literally like me. Like, I am far above these things, but there are other things. And that's inferior worship to any of these other things.
Well, one thing that I would bring up, though, is, and I don't know where the verses are, but God does say, I think it's in Hosea, where he says you're worshiping idols of stone and wood, and they can't breathe, they can't talk, they can't. So that might change that idea a little bit. Mm-hmm. However, when it came to allegiance, and this is where I might go a different way on idolatry, when it came to allegiance, the people, when they got out of Egypt, when they made the golden calf, they wanted to be like all the other peoples around them, because they had gods that would go before them in war when they traveled. And when it comes to the calf, it doesn't necessarily say this in the Bible, but were they worshiping or trying to worship Yahweh God through the calf? Or, I don't know. And that would be an allegiance issue. But obviously, the way that they were celebrating that day was nothing to do with Yahweh God.
Yeah, so were they trying to incorporate Yahweh as just one of many? Because they came out of a polytheistic system, right, for hundreds of years in Egypt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder if, Moses is up on the mountain for all these days, and they're just getting antsy, and they're like, well, Yahweh's was, it's like the Eddie Murphy thing. What have you done for me lately? Okay, Yahweh, yeah, you did that with the plagues and the Red Sea, but it's been a week here, so we're gonna check out. We're gonna make this calf, invite an entity to inhabit it. Something real, not just an object, but something that they think can give them results, like you said, going before them in battle or something.
Well, and I have to bring this up because it's actually kind of somewhat amusing, but when Aaron is confronted about the making the golden calf, he basically says, they gave me the gold and I put it in the furnace, and then out comes this calf. So he kind of left out the part where he crafted it.
Yes, it just happened. I don't know what happened. I plugged it in, I pushed the buttons, and somehow it got microwaved. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating, just the modes of creation that God used to create things. He made all that tech as part of his creation.
It's definitely interesting. Obviously, the underlying supernatural elements technology, we got the natural, we got the spiritual. Most people think of like Genesis when God spoke and things happened. I don't know. It's like if you were to be able to be there and see what took place down to the atoms. I mean, is God creating atoms and then causing those atoms to form? It's kind of wild how the Lord did it, but he's all powerful. He's the creator of everything. And you brought it up a second ago. The enemy that's trying to deceive us is all about counterfeiting and deception. So if there's something in the natural that or in the positive sense that God created, and this is the way he does things, the enemy is going to use another, maybe try to duplicate it or to deceive that, hey, I have similar power. I'm doing it this way. Was it Mike Heiser that was talking about the plagues of Egypt, and specifically some of those first plagues, like the serpents, and then what happened to Moses' staff? It also came into looking like a serpent. It was moving like a serpent, and then, hey, it's going to swallow your serpents. It's kind of a statement there that, like, not only can I duplicate what you just did, but mine is greater. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting to look at it from a lot of different angles. I agree. And this side of eternity, we're not going to have it all figured out. But there definitely is an element of this that God created. And for whatever reason, the technology was either lost or just God didn't want it. Maybe it's part of the fall of Adam, in causing things to be more difficult for humankind. God almost like gave us an amnesic response. Like, I'm not going to allow this technology to be passed on because I don't want it to be passed on. That's part of your punishment. And then if the watchers are like, forget you, God, we're going to be rebellious. We know what you did technology wise.
Yeah.
We want to pass that on, and it's a ploy. It's a ploy to get their end result, which is ultimately idolatry. It's goes back to the original sin. You're trying to crave somebody else's devotion and worship from focusing on the one true God to me. And that's what Satan was trying to, he was jealous of, he was full of pride of, it's like, who is this image of this man, this Yahweh, he thought he should be in that position. He should receive all that devotion, right? And
yeah, and he didn't want to be a servant either.
No, he didn't want to be a servant anymore.
I think one other thought I wanted to mention too is, and this kind of goes to like, what's the depiction in pop culture, in media, in movies and fiction of evil, right? It's some shady looking character, in the dark with a just a bad look on his face, when really evil is a lot more crafty and more alluring. And then another way to think of it too is, how does evil flex its power? It often does appear as something really strong, really dark, really powerful, whether it's like dark, heavy music, or an artist painting a picture of a scary creature. There's a sense of evil is always like flexing its muscles, saying, "Look how strong I am." And here's God, infinite multiples stronger, coming into the world as a baby, the lamb willing to go to the cross and be slain. And just the incredible restraint of power that God has. He doesn't need to prove himself. And I think the counterfeit of Satan is always trying to prove to humanity just how enticing and powerful and strong and magnificent are the wide path that leads to destruction. There's so many paths, and they can all be very alluring, and they can all have power. But it's in that flexing of power where they just kind of flaunt what they have. And God, with that still small voice, if you're willing to accept his truth like a little child, that still small voice, and seek after him, you'll find him. But he doesn't show off a whole lot, compared to the counterfeit ways.
I think that was good points, Pete. I'm just kind of reminded of Elijah when he was waiting for the Lord, and he thought the Lord was going to come in a whirlwind or in just all these powerful methods, and it was the soft spoken word that shook him to his core. And even Jesus's words throughout the Gospels, he rebukes the fleshy, carnal-minded individuals that weren't willing to accept with simple faith what was right in front of them, and he rebuked them, and he said, "This perverse generation is always desiring a sign. It's always desiring." And the flesh and the enemy, they form an alliance. So that's why the flesh can't be redeemed. It has to be crucified. It has to die daily.
Yep. Not until we get our glorified bodies. We have the spirit of adoption now, but the actual adoption in our glorified bodies, then we'll have a redeemed flesh. Just this picture in my head. So think of, wide is the path that leads to destruction, narrow is the path of life. No one comes to the Father but through me, Jesus said. So, I don't know, I've had this image in my head for a long time of, so you guys know kind of how the word sin is unpacked, right? Missing the mark, like someone taking an arrow, taking aim with a bow and arrow at a target and missing the mark. Okay. And I think from that, I had this thought years ago. Look up at the vastness of the sky and someone taking aim randomly at straight above, different angles. How many different ways could this arrow travel through the air or land? Infinite. Like you could do it 1,000 times and it would take different trajectories every time. Minute differences maybe. If you were trying to shoot it in the same spot, it would still be minutely different path through the air. And I think in my head, that's a picture of wide is the path of destruction and all of the allure of Satan's ways and exalting man and neglecting our Creator is like shooting an arrow in every direction. And here's this one target that he's given, and that's through Jesus. And that is the way. And it just, to me, that just like sums up how all of the world religions and all of, whether it's secularism or atheism or agnosticism or a counterfeit religion or a pantheism of just adding God into one of many. You can craft any infinite number of ways, and it's like shooting an arrow just randomly in the sky, but God has that one target, and in His grace, He's given us that one way.
And I would just add that God Himself has to shoot the arrow for us.
Well, that is a talk in and of itself, my friend. Yes, sir. We could get into that another time, but yeah. So thankful for God's incredible creation of telling of His goodness and His ways, and yeah, thankful for you guys just being able to talk. This is awesome.
Hey, Pete. So kind of on that end point, dealing with salvation.
Yeah.
Or another way to look at it is we're out of the family. We're out of right relationship. We're out of God's presence, because it's almost like, and I think we've said it in previous talks, there's almost, I wonder if God has a book, is it written down anywhere, or is it just understood by creation that, and maybe not us, maybe not Adam and Eve, these rules that are in place, right? So these rules that are part of good and evil, part of the nature of things, the creation of things. So it was like you would have a law in a state or in a country, and if you did it a certain way, you did something a certain way, there's punishment. But if you did something else that's not an infraction, you're safe. Mm-hmm. So it was like the enemy, I don't know, God obviously didn't show all the cards, because He was able to trick Satan with the lineage of his son, the birth of his son, even the death of his son. Because if they would have known, meaning Satan and the ones with him.
Yeah, Paul says that.
Right? They would never have crucified Christ.
That's right.
But so there was this kind of loophole, but it was only Him that could fulfill this requirement in order to redeem us. Mm-hmm. And it kind of ties into, it makes me think of what Tim Alberino talks about dominion, and even when it talks about hybrids, right? That in order to have authority here on earth, it had to be a human that would do certain things, right?
Yeah.
And what did Jesus come as? He was fully God, but He was fully man. He was the second Adam. So he met the legal requirements to check all the boxes and fulfill the mandate, of His Father, in order to get us back into the family. So it's kind of, it makes you wonder, did Adam and Eve know these rules? Were these things hidden from them?
Or did they know them after they ate?
Was it tied to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
Right.
And when they ate of it, maybe they had a revelation after the fact. It's like, oh shoot, ignorance is bliss. We should have stayed in the Matrix.
Yeah.
But they opened up that can of worms, and they were ultimately disobedient. And I know they talk about it on Blurry Creatures from time to time. Did it actually change their genetics? Who knows?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, like as far as epigenetics and DNA and how, iniquities are passed down. Like literally, you have a predisposition. Like we know that if you have a grandpa who is an alcoholic, you have a predisposition. You have a family member that had mental problems, depression or suicide. These things do carry on. I think there is some memory genetically in that. But I was going to say too, I think there are rules. A lot of times when we talk about like spiritual warfare, we talk about like legal access that we've given the enemy through sin or other things. I think there's some sort of cosmic rule book that God has. And we get a glimpse of that in the Satan figure in Job, whether or not it is the Satan, capital S. But in the Old Testament, it was never a proper name. But, approaching God and saying, hey, what about Job? And God saying, okay, you can do this, but you can't do this. So there's some sort of give and take, and there's some sort of framework for how all of this works.
I would agree with that,
yeah.
and it seems like Lucifer being the smartest or the highest ranking of those that are fallen has such a high intellect in comparison to us.
Mm-hmm.
And in his own deception, being the father of lies, he's deceived himself that he can actually win.
Yeah,
and he's
or at least
deceived other
delay.
people. So it's interesting that he understands some of the rules, or maybe all of the rules that are available to his knowledge, and he's trying to catch God in a bind, but
in a technicality,
loophole. He can't catch him. That the whole process. God's set forth this thing in motion in Genesis 3, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, and it was like I don't know if that was the moment that the enemy was like, okay, he got a little revelation from God, and it's like game on. So and then you got Genesis 6, so he's trying to snuff out pure humans, and then so it's kind of just it I don't know, it set things in motion, but it's kind of move and counter move you see going on,
and that's a L.A. Marzulli book.
Right.
No, I was just gonna say because we Don and I touched briefly, I think even on a podcast, talking about like how deterministic is God and kind of how his sovereignty works. But even to that point, like here you have Satan with his minions and his plans, and then you've got all of mankind, most of which don't follow God. And it's like, here's God like sitting back going, do what you want. I'm still going to accomplish what I set out to accomplish. I don't have to control both sides of the chessboard. I am that much smarter and stronger and wiser than all of you, and even you, Satan, that I created higher than anything. I'm still 10 moves, 20 moves, 1,000 moves ahead of you, and I'm still letting you have all this freedom to wreak all this havoc.
And Pete, I want to say it's people wonder, it's like, well, why did the Lord didn't have to create it this way,
Right? Is this a plan B?
Well, and I think it comes down to free will. He gave free will to us. He gave free will to the angelic sons of God, or as Tim talks about, the elder race, But ultimately, what did God want? He wanted a family that would choose him out of their own free will. But in order to get what God wanted, there's a byproduct. There's the byproduct that people aren't going to choose him. They're going to choose other paths. So it was like, I don't know, God didn't create evil. Evil is a byproduct of free will. It's the opposite choice. It's the yin and the yang.
You don't have that. If that's the intent that he set up, you don't have that full picture unless you allow for the possibility for it to go whatever way we choose or the angels choose or so on. Like, he's still sovereign over it, and he's going to accomplish specific things, absolutely. But yeah, there seems to be that give and take of, yeah, I'm God. I could do all of these things, but I'm deciding to do it this way. Yeah, that's a topic in and of itself, but
it is. Maybe we got off track.
That's
there
okay. No,
a little
it's
bit, but
it's good
it kinda
stuff.
All ties. It all fits together.
It all fits together because, yeah, people will look at the fall in Genesis and go, what the heck, God? I mean, you look at the misery of our world, and you're just going to let these things go? And yet, no, there's a contrast, too. Also, you talk about, God being glorified, having the backdrop of sin and evil, and letting us kind of deal with our consequences of our own sin and how the world is. We see how good God is with that backdrop, and we probably wouldn't see how good He is and how good goodness is without that backdrop. Like an earthquake happens in Haiti, and hopefully God's church, believers, come in and they bring aid, they bring food, they bring comfort. We are the hands and feet. We're the body of Christ. And in a lot of ways, it's like He's left it up to us, in a lot of ways, to show the world who He is. Because like you said, Luke, we have dominion on the earth. We are His representatives. So He does intervene, certainly. And He can do things unilaterally, but it does seem like the way in general that He's worked it out is, well, I couldn't do many miracles in this town because you guys didn't have faith. Wait a minute, Jesus is God. You couldn't do miracles? There seems to be some cosmic rules involved with faith and how open we are to God and what things happen on the earth. And yet if we go the other way, we close ourselves off, well, now evil is allowed to flourish, and a Hitler is allowed to rise to power. And He kind of lets humanity deal with that, to a certain degree.